yourself.
My name's Angus Holdsworth. I'm the Managing Director of Andun Engineering Consultants, specialist temporary works design consultancy. And this is, I don't know, number 14 in a series of webinars we've done now. But this one's going to just be Q&A, which will be a bit different, but we'll see how it goes. And I'll pass you over to David Thomas from the TWF.
Thank you, Angus. I'm Dave Thomas. I'm the Secretary and Director of the Temporary Works Forum on the one hand, and I do some freelance life, have a freelance life as well. Checkered background, poacher, gamekeeper, engineering management consultancy, health and safety executive, and contracting, and largely these days Temporary Works Forum. So thanks for the invitation.
No problem. Malachy, could you introduce yourself, sir?
Hi everyone, my name is Malachy Ryan. I'm Managing Director of Alan White Design, and we are a Temporary Works consultancy, and I'm also a Director of the Temporary Works Forum.
Fantastic. And finally, Steve.
Morning everybody, my name's Steve Williams. I'm the Technical Head of Discipline for Buildings and Civils for what was IP and is now Capital Delivery within Network Rail. I've got 30 years in the game, and 20 of that has been in consultancy, but also innovated to contractors. And then the past 11 or so years has been with Network Rail on client side, leading some pretty impressive jobs and concentrating really on making sure that there's proper interfaces between temporary works and permanent works, and we can get the jobs working well. How's that?
Fantastic. Welcome to all of the panel. I'm just going to start by sharing my screen. So can you all see now the first question of the day?
Yep.
Fantastic. So we've been asked by someone who's chosen to remain anonymous, maybe because they know there's going to be lots of discussion on this one, but with the net zero goal for 2050, what do you believe are the key changes when temporary works required to achieve this goal? So I'm going to start off by passing this one over to Steve.
Okay, well, this is the big thing that's going to be happening to the entire industry, and not just in rail, but the entire industry. And by way of example, Network Rail have only this week launched their environmental strategy, and there's an awful lot of things in that strategy. There's electrification and all sorts of big picture issues. And although there's not much specific on temporary works, the things that are in that strategy will allow teams looking at designing and procuring and maintaining assets the ability to think much deeper about how we can improve things moving forwards. And I also had the pleasure of listening to a guy called Mike Cook from Bureau Happold at the iStructi Gold Medal Awards last night, and he gave a really impassioned and powerful speech on climate change and what engineers can do. And many standouts for that, and I know that document, that recording will be available soon on the iStructi website, and I thoroughly recommend everybody to listen to that. It's a really well worthwhile hour and a half of listening. One of the key things that stood out for me is that if you build things, in terms of temporary works, is if you build things lighter, you can, the necessary temporary works that's needed to build them can be lighter. And if things are lighter, then they use less carbon. And then also, my personal view on temporary works is that they're very carbon friendly, because take for instance a simple scaffolding pole. You buy a scaffolding pole, how many times do you use that and reuse that? So when we're thinking about permanent works, we're thinking about reuse of materials and different materials, and trying to cut down on cement, etc. But in the temporary works game, we probably use many of our materials hundreds and hundreds of times. But nevertheless, there's work that can be done, and I think this tie-up between permanent works and temporary works and a drive towards things that are lighter will help drive lighter temporary works, and that's going to be good for carbon. Is that okay for a starting point?
Sounds good. Anyone else on the panel want to add a perspective to that one?
Yeah, I'll jump in if you don't mind, Christian. I think the Temporary Works Forum is working on a constructability guide at the minute. One of the directors, Jim Todd, is leading that. And I think more involvement of early involvement of contractors or temporary works consultants within the design team. So in a case of a building like a REBA Stage 2 or something like that, where we can highlight the complex temporary works that have been built into the permanent design, maybe design those out, and in so save cost, program, carbon, all those good things that would streamline the building process. And then Steve touched on it as well about the reusability of proprietary propping, false work, scaffolding. I think we're already doing some good work in that area. But how do you quantify the level of carbon associated to a project when a prop has a design life of maybe 5 to 10 years and it's been used in numerous projects? So we need to work with the suppliers on how we would calculate that on a project by project basis.
I'll maybe follow on, Malachy. I think, and it's a challenge that was set at this week's Temporary Works Forum meeting, so I hope we'll be able to start collating and collecting views. But I think one for me is, how do we actually measure carbon? Is a whole life cycle approach being taken? It does appear, and I'm not involved at the front line these days, but it does appear that there needs to be a bit more incentive to permanent works designers to think about the temporary works and the carbon that's involved. So a light, lean structure that looks great may not be the best solution if it's going to require a mass of temporary works. And I think that if the permanent works designer had to account for the carbon on a whole life cycle basis, then that could make a difference in terms of temporary work. So it's something certainly I would like to explore a little bit more. I'm sure there are specialists out there who could perhaps advise us, and we need to tap into you as a resource.
Okay, I think there's been an interesting comment coming on this from John Charles that says temporary works help greatly in recycling buildings for new uses, which assist greatly in reducing the carbon footprint. Would the panel agree?
Yes, I'd take that one to start. My gut feeling as an engineer is that we are going to be doing a huge amount more in the future about refurbishing the existing building stock that we've got. Just looking at COVID and the fact that less people are using offices is possibly an opportunity for offices to be converted to residential use, who knows. But one thing is for certain, over the 30 years I've been in the game, I've worked on some fantastic refurbishment projects, and those refurbishment projects could not have occurred without extensive and complex temporary works in order to change them from A to B. Look at, for instance, facade retention, where we've got listed buildings that remain listed buildings. They've still got the same wonderful facade, but behind that facade they're completely rebuilt. And the temporary works that goes into that is pretty impressive stuff. So, yeah, I agree. Temporary works will be great. What's it say? Temporary works help greatly in recycling buildings. I think temporary works are an absolute necessity to recycle buildings. So I fully agree with that statement.
Okay, brilliant. And for those who do want to check out our YouTube channel, we do have a video of Josh talking about the facade retention at the Majestic, which I think is a good example.
Look at that advertising everything. I've got a slightly different opinion on new builds at the moment. If you build them very light and you build them just purely to suit the one situation, what happens when something like COVID comes along and we have to repurpose buildings? If it's been built so lightweight that it just does the job and just lasts the amount of time required, surely you're then in a situation where you've got to do significant works to repurpose that building. Whereas if we built them more robustly to start with, and you build them once and you keep them so they can be repurposed in the future, is that not a more sustainable way of building? Or is there a balance between the two that we need to reach?
I don't disagree with you, but how do you explain that to the client that we need to make these concrete slabs another 75 mil deeper with rebar and everything, in case you may ever reuse the building for a different purpose in the future? I think that would be a hard sell to a client. When
I think so, but with this new net zero goal, there's going to have to be legislation brought in. I think it's one of the key points in the ICE document, isn't it, that there will be legislation, and they've got to figure out who's going to pay for these changes, and that's what's going to have to happen if we're going to get anywhere near these goals.
John's question is in regard to, as I'm reading it anyway, is in regard to existing buildings and their reuse. But moving to your point about new buildings, I mean, look at the railway stock. So much of it is Victorian, and if it hadn't been for the Victorians effectively greatly over-engineering things, we wouldn't be here now. It would have fallen down. So, and then it's a wonder if Mike Cook's address was phenomenal. I'm going to repeat what I said before. I recommend it's looked at. One of the things that he said that was interesting was that this question was raised: how do we design very robustly now to accommodate what might happen in the future, or do we design right to the wire to get carbon down low now? And Mike's argument, and there'll be those who disagree and those who agree. I'm tending to disagree myself, but because I like the idea of robust structures that stand the test of time. But he said that we've got to act now, and we've got to reduce the carbon footprint now. And his steer was, we need structures that are compliant, but are designed very closely so that we can reduce the footprint now, because we need to act now. And that was an outstanding statement. Whether or not clients choose to embrace that, because we as one client, and I can't speak for others, we look at life cycle costing. So we are very interested in the whole use of an asset throughout its life, including operations, maintenance and demolition. So I'm tending towards thinking, well, I would like to be designing and building and handing back to my asset management colleagues robust buildings that will stand the test of time, and robust structures. Bridges, for instance, 120 years design life. Well, how robust do you need to be? But I think there is a case that we need to think how we can get the time to invest more time in design to bring carbon levels down, and that will bring down temporary works costs and carbon, and everyone is a winner. Anyway.
Yeah, I'm going to have to watch this address and see what he has to say on the subject. I didn't see it last night. I think I can see it both ways, but
yeah,
maybe it's different for infrastructure.
Yeah, I think it will be. It'll be different for infrastructure, and it'll be it's certainly different from private clients looking at developing housing, for instance. Totally different issues.
I think, Steve, for me, there's a balance between the two of robust versus lean, because to me, lean is no good at all if you have to have tons and tons of carbon to construct the thing. So there's probably a balance somewhere, and I don't know quite how the numbers are undertaken. And no doubt I need to gen up on all the ISO standards and the European standards and so on. But
it's so project specific, isn't it? I mean, what's good for the goose isn't good for the gander, etc.
Okay, great. A really interesting discussion there. Definitely think that's going to be something we'll be talking about more. So now we've had a question in that I think we'll throw the cat amongst the pigeons again. So I'm just going to put that up on the screen for us now. So this is coming from, I think it's Mustafa, who's on the call today. What advice would you have for clients who are happy to use builder knowledge for temporary works rather than engage with a TW engineer or designer?
I suppose depends on the scale of the project. If we're talking about domestic projects, typically, you know, the builder would deal with the temporary works. They may go out to an engineer occasionally, but there's a lot of projects where a needling system or something like that, where the builder will have done it before. They're needing to put in a new steel lintel. They'll have strong backs or acro props, and they would typically just go and do it. I wouldn't advise that. I'd still think you should get a design completed, partly because us consultants can get fees for it, but it's safer. It's definitely safer. But I think as the scale of the project grows, you need to get a temporary works engineer or designer with a background in this works to get involved in the project.
I think it comes back to competence, doesn't it? And a builder may well be competent to do this on a simple house project. And in a lot of cases, things like 1.2 metre high formwork, for instance, does that really need a temporary works engineer to specify it when the chippy can build that themselves from their own experience and their own competence? I think there's a balance somewhere. Where that is, I don't think it's something you can specify specifically. You need to accept that people can look at it and go, right, I know how to do this, I've done it before, or no, hang on a minute, this is similar, it's not the same. I need to get some experience, and it comes down to people's competence, isn't it?
There's also a risk element as well, really, isn't there? Like
is.
an insurance risk element. I know some contractors we work with, you know, they like the fact that if it's a designed item from us, if there are any issues or any failures, then, you know, they pick up the phone and it's to us. So that contractor is taking on that risk when they specify the temporary works themselves.
My view is I tend to take a legislative approach on it, and I've forgotten the wording but you have to ensure stability, and then, you know, another regulation relates to what I will call competence. It's not a term CDM uses, knowledge, skills, experience, and I think the current vogue is to add behaviour to that equation. But yeah, to ensure stability. So the law doesn't tell you how you've got to do it. It tells you what you need to achieve, and if the builder can achieve it and assesses themselves as competent, then so be it. But I certainly, my personal preference is to try and get temporary works engineers involved, because I've seen too many things go wrong where there was no engineering input.
It's difficult. I'm just thinking. Well, from the Network Rail perspective, obviously, we demand assurance on designs, etc. But from a personal perspective, there are a lot of things that go wrong with domestic jobs. You often see on the news domestic jobs falling down because people aren't thinking properly, or the builders think they'll crack on with having one acro prop supporting 50 tons of masonry, etc., etc. So I do believe there is a strong case for maybe an improvement in education, so the significance of temporary works is given due credence throughout the industry. And you only have to look at the news to see that or go on YouTube, all these domestic projects where they're cutting out a basement and the next door neighbour's house starts falling in, etc. There's definitely a need to do things properly, and I think doing things properly often includes engaging the appropriately qualified and experienced people, and not dare I say winging it.
I think Angus, that's actually the basement thing that Steve mentions there is something you covered in a previous presentation, isn't it, about the risk of if you don't you don't do that right, that can get very expensive.
I think we shared a few pictures, didn't we, of where things have gone wrong that we've seen in recent years, and
I remember seeing that, all the cracks developing.
Yeah. It's knowing your own competency, isn't it? When to ask the question, I think, is when you're competent or when you're not competent. It's the same for any engineer, isn't it? There'll be a project you might look at that you've no idea, you've never seen it before. You're not going to go and take it on without getting some further advice. It's the same with the builder. If it's a simple opening in a 2-story masonry wall, they might well be competent, but if you then chuck a basement into play, they need to engage the correct advice, don't they? It's knowing your own limits, to me,
Steve, picking up
to ask for help.
Yeah, picking up on you. I'm just rapidly recalling my HSE days and investigating fatal accidents, and sort of they're flashing up in my mind, and many of them relate to smaller jobs in the back streets of our towns and cities, for me in the north of England. I can't think off the top of my head of one where there was a major, a tier 1 contractor involved. That's not to say that they don't have incidents, because they do, but much of what I was having to look at was the builder knowledge end of the market, and I can think of sites I visited where the follow-up letter or notice that I was prepared to support was saying you need engineering input.
Okay, David, there's a follow-up question that kind of fits that's asked to you, so I'll ask that. So it says, David, this is from Jeffrey Cannell. David, can you comment on a permanent works designer's legal responsibilities in relation to temporary works in a small domestic project, such as forming an opening?
Well, a permanent works designer needs to have at least one method in mind of how their project can, or how their design can be constructed, and then needs to provide information, residual risks. If the contractor then wishes to come up with a different method of work, that's their prerogative, under contract usually. So the permanent works designer very much has a responsibility to think about the temporary works issues, not the temporary works design, what you might call the number crunching, but to think about construction methodology. And I do think generally, from the sort of feedback that I get from members, is that permanent works designers are not good at thinking about construction methodology, and there's probably a lot of reasons for that. And of course, there are obviously exceptions, some rather sweeping brush, but generally there's a lot of criticism from temporary works designers of permanent works designers.
Okay, great. No, that's good. So we've actually had a question or a comment come in, and I know you'll all recognise the name. Angus, do you see the question from Malcolm?
I'm just trying to find a picture of that basement failure. Where is it, Malcolm? So, are you going to put it up on the screen? I'm going to copy it on the screen.
Yeah, I will do 1 second.
Oh, yes, Malcolm from the ICE. Yeah, of course. Sorry, I was trying to think the Malcolm Peak. Yes, Malcolm from the ICE, isn't it? All very same.
So I'm just bringing
Copy
that up.
across.
So.
In the meantime, I'll read it out. So the question is, could professional recognition as EngTech, perhaps MICE, be one way to demonstrate its knowledge, skills and behaviour? Should this be credible, defendable method of demonstrating ability to do things properly, is what Malcolm has asked. Again, to me, that still comes back to competence. You could be EngTech, you could be CEng, but doesn't necessarily mean that you know how to solve a particular problem. For instance, I wouldn't go off and start designing a road because it's not in my competence. So I might be a chartered engineer, but doesn't mean I can necessarily go and do any aspect of engineering. So that's my perspective on it, is that having EngTech isn't necessarily the answer. It's a good thing to do, don't get me wrong, and it shows a level of professional commitment, but it still comes back to competence to me.
I would, there may be a role, I think I agree. At a personal level, I won't sort of commit that as a TWF view. However, do we undertake our professional competence assessments properly now? We're not getting permanent works designers. If they're not getting it, are we assessing things correctly now? So I've got lots of questions in that area. However, I do think that the issue will remain on our agenda for quite some time. I attended a webinar yesterday with the BSI, who are launching a consultation on an overarching framework for competence of individuals. Now, initially, it's looking at high rise, the post-Grenfell agenda, but there seems little doubt, and certainly from the government representative who spoke, that at some point that document will move into other areas, and whether temporary works is one of them, who knows. But I think the competence question, and how you assess and judge competence is going to be around for a long time. And certainly, I'm an ICE fellow. I don't know whether ICE are up to the mark. If I'm being honest, I don't see that information coming back to me as a member. I'd like to see ICE benchmark themselves against this draft standard, and before we start thinking about further disciplines. Primarily this particular document's about high rise, but I think the implications are quite profound, really, for the profession. Again, if it's a webinar, I think another one, if I can plug that webinar, I thought it was very interesting, and quite very thought-provoking. So maybe I'll try and provide that link on TWF's website for anybody to pick up.
Yeah, I think myself, professional, qualifications with IC, Constructability, whatever an organization is the way to go forward. You're always learning, especially in temporary works. There's new products and methods every year. There's new learning, but one of the things we're looking at in the temporary works forum at the minute is what do we want to be in 10 years for our members, and what do we want to have in place. And one idea that's been mooted is maybe an almost accredited temporary works engineer is a possibility. And do we go down that route? Yes, you may be ICE, CEng or iStructD, but it doesn't necessarily mean you have the skills and knowledge to be a temporary works engineer. So do we look at accreditation in temporary work so that it gives clients and contractors confidence that you can do that role?
I'm a fellow of the Institution of Structural Engineers and Institution of Civil Engineers. I'm pretty passionate about training the next generation of engineers, and I'm pretty well focused in my view that being a chartered engineer or an eng tech or iEng is a demonstration of the right attributes and the right engineering baseline, so that you can think in engineering terms as you gain experience. But knowledge and skills and experience are all things that help you become eng tech or eng or member or fellow, but they don't actually make you competent in the field unless you've gained all those knowledge, skills and experience. So Angus, I'm with you on this one. I believe that we should be encouraging people to get the attributes of an engineer, doing engineering work, because they can think like an engineer. And people who are not engineers don't and can't think like engineers do. So I'm pretty passionate that we should be going in that direction, but we need to recognise what we don't know. And I have got 30 years in the game, but there is such a wide breadth of things that I can safely say that I know nothing about in our industry. And there are some things that I can call myself an expert in. And I'm 30 years in. No human being can be an expert in everything. So it's a case of recognising what you do and don't know.
I think for me, Steve, that fragmentation of the industry that's happened over, I think, the last 20 years, brings dangers. I have an expression oft used: risk thrives at interfaces, and we have become a very fragmented industry. So part of me says, wouldn't it be fantastic if temporary works was integrated into core professional qualifications? There is no, as I understand it, there is no iStructD question on temporary works, and I understand there's not a lot of appetite to have one either, which seems a bit of a shame. And I've already mentioned ICE. So, but I think that fragmentation of the industry, whilst it brings pluses, I think there are also risks as well. and but I don't see that ill rolling back. I think it's going to continue, and I think recognizing the limits of your ability and what you do and don't know is one of the key parts of competence. So there are lots of bits of civil engineering, because I'm getting towards 40 years in. There are lots of bits of civil engineering I wouldn't touch. I might understand it, I might have a view on it, but I'm not up to date on it because I haven't been haven't had a new CPD in certain fields, and there are other fields where I would say I was an expert because I try and keep up to date, but it's in a very niche area. So yeah, risks, that fragmentation brings risks, I think.
I don't know about you, Malachy, but I'm certainly finding our clients are asking more and more questions about competence. Certainly more so than they were maybe 4 or 5 years ago, in terms of what have we done, what can we demonstrate we've done in the past, and even going so far as saying which engineers are you using on this scheme, and which of these aspects can they cover competently. I'm certainly seeing that a lot more.
I would agree that, and the PQQs and supplier questionnaires that we're seeing as well from contractors, we need to talk about with an internal IC training scheme.
Yeah.
We need to show details of that. We need to show competence of all our engineers, how we're actually dealing with CDM on a project by project basis, and the training, and how we're looking at health and safety training internally. And we're happy to do that, but it is definitely a more complex supplier questionnaire process than it was 4, 5, 6 years ago.
I think
Definitely.
and I think Malachy, I think that will increase. From this overarching framework for competence. So if you're involved in high rise, which I think is defined as, is it over 18 meters and more than 6 stories? So it's quite a lot of work, I would imagine, that's going to fall into that category. You've only got to get, it's being written with a view to third-party accreditation schemes. So there are a lot of people going to be coming on board behind this framework standard. And if a client, say Network Rail, says, well, look, if you want to work on our jobs, you've got to have X, Y, and Z, then that'll push the agenda. Clients will push the agenda.
So within our business, there is a recognition that competence is key throughout, and there will be more on that moving forwards. I'm certain of it.
Already we get quite a lot for Network Rail. You'll get, if you're going to be the CRE on the scheme or the CEM, then it's an interview each time, isn't it? There's a lot of in-depth questioning straight away just to demonstrate that competence to work on a network.
It can be a light touch. It can go to quite deep, and it all depends on the circumstances.
Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. So I'm going to put up another question on the screen. Bear with me. So this is a question. So we've talked about standards. So I'll let me know who on the panel wants to take this one. But it's what is your opinion on adopting Eurocodes for temporary works? Is the consideration of partial factors for soils pointless unless you have a detailed site investigation report? Should we just use global factors of safety as we are only dealing with the temporary duration?
You'll have to keep that one on the screen. It's a 3-parter.
Okay, I'll leave that on the screen.
Can I jump in on that one?
Yeah.
So the first part, they have their place, but you've got to make sure you maintain a similar factor of safety as we do to 5975. Is the key part to that, to me, and that we should still be checking to 2.5% for stability, and we should be making sure we have a robust structure when we're finished. The next one, I don't see how you can design to Eurocodes unless you have a fully detailed site investigation, and quite often you'll get 2 boreholes and say, "I'll do that. You've got to design that to EC7." Well, hang on a minute. That's not how EC7 is written, really. You're supposed to have a fully detailed investigation in place with a report on engineering properties. That's the whole point. You know enough about the soil to be able to credibly apply the factors. So from my point of view, if you haven't got decent SI, you might as well stick to lump factors of safety. Again, it depends on the project, but for something that's as simple as a mobile crane base or similar, you're as well off designing the lump factor safety if you've got minimum SI as you would be doing it to Eurocode and fudging the the factors. So that's my point of view on those 3 points.
Yeah, I'll jump in there. We've been using Eurocodes for quite some time and all the kind of member designs and that, and then tying back into the BS5975 and the other codes as required. I'd agree with your point in site investigations. A lot of the time we're dealing with high-level soil stratas, so we're looking at mobile crane outriggers, maybe some trench sheeting and earth retention, and a lot of soil investigations I see, if they're a pile project, they focus on the deep ground and they don't look at the shallow ground, and you don't have data for that in the first place, so you have to be very, very conservative. So it's adding cost to the project. In relation to global factors of safety, it's up to the engineer, I think, to kind of judge that.
I think my only contribution on this one would be don't mix, and also maybe have a look at PAS 8812, which was is production informed by a Temporary Works Forum guide looking at the use of Eurocodes. So yeah, but I think don't mix, because of the potential for muddling up factors of safety.
I'll have a stab at this then. First one, certain companies, public companies such as Network Rail, for permanent works, absolutely have to design to Eurocodes. It's the law. Temporary works is a bit of a grey area. There's certainly encouragement that we should be designed to Eurocodes, but they are of a temporary nature. And I'm aware that the BS5975 Part 3 is what it is at the moment and is used. So I believe there's less of a compulsion to go down the road of Eurocodes with temporary works. However, direction will be forthcoming when Part 3 gets amended, and Dave's already mentioned 8812. To me, the design needs to be a competent design that does the job it needs to do in terms of temporary works. I'll leave that one at that for now. It's open. The consideration of partial factors sort point this unless you have detailed site investigation, but absolutely. I am a huge advocate of sufficient ground investigation in all circumstances. In the railway, we deal with an awful lot of legacy structures such as earthworks, where it's virtually impossible. Well, you can do site investigation in one place and move 2 meters and it's completely different. It's that variable in places. But certainly the ability to do permanent works and temporary works always demands adequate site investigation. And we as an industry should be spending more on adequate site investigation to de-risk projects. I'm certain of that, and I've been for the past 30 odd years. Should be using global factors when we only deal with temporary duration. Well, a lot of temporary works in Network Rail could be up for 3-4 years longer. So you need to design the temporary works bearing in mind its duration. But I would be an advocate for following the design standards that are out there. Does that help at all? Probably leaves it a bit open. But that's the nature of the beast. Why hasn't 5975 already been changed to Eurocodes only? It's a British standard. It's still a live British standard. It's still considered best practice by many. There's work to be done. The industry needs to work on it.
And yeah, again, it also comes back to the project, doesn't it? If you're designing temporary works that are clearly going to be significant, if they're there 3 or 4 years, there's a different level of what's the word I'm looking for? It's a much more involved design than a mobile crane standing there for 3 hours. So the level of SI you're going to undertake and everything else, and one of them, to my mind, it's quite right to just use a quick, simple lump factor of safety on a geotechnical bearing platform. Whereas the other,
what you're hitting on there is this word that we haven't mentioned in this conversation so far called risk.
Yep.
And it's about being proportionate.
Yeah.
You know, some temporary works issues are very simple, some are very complicated, and it's about deciding the right thing. One thing's for certain, agreeing the way forwards on a project specific basis is a good move, because then everybody knows where they're heading. And I think it was David that also mentioned the fact that you can't be mixing the two up, or if you do mix the two up, you need to be very clear about how you're getting from A to B, and that's sometimes missed. So just a pointer.
Okay, great. Thanks, everyone. So I'm going to move on, and I think this question will most definitely start with Malachy, given that he gave a presentation about this as part of our series. So Jarvis asked, have you got any recommendations for alternatives to traditional scaffolding for access to mechanically prep and repaint a steel bridge over a tidal river?
Jarvis, good question. So typically you would go a drop scaffold along the full underside of the bridge. You could go with a grillage platform, which is basically a platform made out of scaffold components, size of a tennis court roughly, and you would clamp some sort of runway beam or system to the underside of the bridge. You'd hang the platform from cables, and you just move it along the platform and do your paintwork segment by segment. There are in highways side of things, they do a lot of I don't know the exact word, but it's the reach out mechanical baskets. You know, they've got in the back of a truck, they pull up and you can reach out and down and around, but that's more for inspection. You can do it from cradles. You could put cradles like you see on the side of a building on a track system as well on the underside of the bridge and run these along. So there's lots of ways of doing it. I completed a presentation, and the other area that I work on, I do some training videos in bite-sized temporary works. So if you search for that on YouTube, there's a video that goes into quite a lot of detail on access to bridges, and it'd be worthwhile for you to watch that.
I think is an important point to make is about encapsulation. So if you're going to be taking off lead paint from a bridge, etc., you need to be aware of the consequences of doing that. And a lot of money is spent on full encapsulation to allow to ensure that the materials arising don't find their way into the atmosphere. Yeah,
and also on platforms, the base of them sometimes needs to be waterproofed up as far as the toe board to collect the debris and wash off from the power washing operations that you do. You can't just simply put it into the water course, which used to happen historically. That can't happen anymore. On these platforms now, they collect all the grit, the blast grit, the material, the water even, and then that's transported off the platform as well.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks everyone on that one. So our next question here. So typically within regeneration, tender packages either have limited existing construction data or an extensive set of documents. Short tender return timescales seriously impact the ability to consider structural issues. How should temporary works requirements be considered in these circumstances?
I'll jump in briefly. I think Angus is probably chomping at the bit to get at this one as well, but we do see the variability. If you're looking at a cut and carve project that's a concrete frame, on one project you could have testing completed on it. It'll tell you the rebar and the slab, the quantity of everything in the columns and beams, and then that allows you to do more with the structure. It allows you to put more demolition load on it or more imposed construction live load on it, whereas in other projects you have to take a guess at it. You know, you may just have a dimensional survey. You have to maybe use your engineering judgment and say, well, there may be minimum steel in this beam, but it doesn't allow you to do as much with the structure as you would like. So I would always, press on clients to try and spend that bit more money before it comes to construction, so that the temporary works engineer has got all the information they can to do as much as they can with the structure. Angus?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about which way to go with this. So I think there's two parts to it. Short tender returns, it means you're basically just taking a stab when you're pricing it based on previous experience of similar structures. Now, limited existing construction data, that's a huge problem. I don't see how, in a lot of cases, they've finalised the permanent works designs before they've got enough information on the structure to do so. So not only have you got permanent works designs that's not finalised, you're then supposed to try and price and work out what temporary works you're going to require for your client, so they can then build their price and tender the package. And there's so many different areas where it can go wrong in that sequence of events that it's a big problem for the industry, and it's why you often end up with contractors not making any money, or because of the changes that come about. And then you're straight into the bun fight situation where you're trying to recover money from, or they're trying to recover money from their client because they didn't have the information at the beginning, whereas clients spend more money up front getting that information on the structure, and then they present that to the teams who are tendering for the work. You're going to get a better outcome. You've got to. And interestingly, it's on the demolition side of things, but we're starting to see that a bit more with Network Rail, for instance. We're now getting involved earlier on projects for demolition and rebuild schemes on bridges, where we're getting to go and do this investigation, come up with concept demolitions plans before that goes out for demolition contractors to tender. So somebody's been paid to go and get the information, present it, and then that gets issued for tender. So the demolition contractors have got a good idea of weights and even an identified methodology as to how they can complete the works. So they're not all trying to come up with their own different ideas. Nobody's worked out the weights. Nobody actually knows what materials are in the structures. So things are starting to change in some areas from what I'm seeing.
Could I dive in here? Just flash the question back up on the screen again, because when I read what I've just read, I saw some massive, huge, humongous red flags waving. And I'm thinking immediately, CDM regulations, client duties, pre-construction information. Where is it? Okay, how can anybody realistically price for anything if they've got nothing to go on? So if that's happening, if what I'm looking at now on that screen is happening, then the industry needs to ask some serious questions of itself, because how can it possibly realistically price or frame what it wants to do? And if clients who may be not knowledgeable about their responsibilities under the CDM regulations, therefore need to be advised, are adopting that sort of attitude, then it is no wonder that we get into all sorts of trouble. So I would, if I was in that situation, no matter how desperate for money I was, I wouldn't be pricing for something where I didn't know what I was going to get into.
Steve, you beat me to it. You know, that massive red flags to me as well, in terms of what the law, criminal law, requires people to do, and clients need to provide information. I believe that also involves investing in surveys and the like, and if that's not being done, then they need to make sufficient time available for the contractor within the contract, although I suspect that doesn't happen very often. So the contractor gets it, in the neck both ways, because they're not given adequate information on which to tender, and they're not given enough time on which to build. So some big flags for me, Steve. I agree entirely. What's the principal designer doing in the pre-construction phase? But maybe don't get me onto that one. So
I think the point I made before about the fact that it might be a case of client education in that circumstance is a really robust way of improving everybody's lot. The
benefits of some early investment and having longer term savings. What I would actually find, if I put a TWF hat on, it would actually be fabulous to have some real hard data, some case studies to try and present that business case. Because I believe it, many people do, but I can't put my finger on any evidence. And it would actually be nice to have some evidence to put in front of a client to say, here you are, this is why I want you to do it. Yes, you are going to have to invest a bit more now, but you will save down the line.
Just to go back to your comment, Steve, I'm seeing this happening on mainly on building projects.
Yep.
I'm getting submitted. I work with quite a few contractors, and you'll get a stage 3 REBA package through. And as an example, one I dealt with about 4 weeks ago, masonry building, 2 stories high with a timber floor and timber roof and cast iron columns. And the notes on the drawings are allow for possibly all of the rafters to be replaced. Survey is completed of the cast iron columns and may need replaced. Foundation extents unknown, making allowance for it. All the floor joists may need to be repaired. So you have a scenario there from the temporary work side where you could be propping the end of every single rafter, every single joist in that building. My recommendation to the client was, why don't they just, do a facade retention, gut the inside of the building and put in a steel frame composite floor system. But that's the risk that the contractors are having to take in these tenders. That's the information given. And I feel some empathy for the contractors in this because they are taking huge risk.
Yeah, I agree with exactly what Malachy's saying there. You see it all the time. There's not enough information being gathered. It's gone out to tender, and then we're all building our prices up to try and cover that risk.
Based on a whole bunch of unrealistic assumptions and unknowns that nobody's had the foresight to try and find out about before they get stuck into it. It's just so wrong.
The client doesn't realise they're actually paying for it anyway. That risk put into the contractor's tender.
And does that particular client have any appreciation of the fact that if he does the work up front, he will be de-risking the project and resulting in potentially huge savings for everybody, profitability for everybody, savings for everybody, just by getting it right up front. It sounds so simple. I know it's complicated, but we need as an industry to be demanding getting the right information so that we can de-risk projects.
Yeah, I don't think the clients are aware of that. And I suppose they focus on the money that, not the money, but there's a pot there of money for the construction side of it. So let's try and lump as much into that as we can. And the direct costs that are associated with us on the design side of it, we'll try and get those as low as we can. It's an element of moving the risk as well.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is, isn't it? It's getting somebody else to take the risk on.
Yeah,
that's what they're aiming
at. Okay, brilliant.
Pretty good old moan there.
Well, I mean, the long and short of it is, if we can get this right by doing the right things, the right things are set down in legislation and standards. We just got to do them, and be given the time to do them properly. If we do them properly, then the job's a breeze on that particular job. If they know that they don't need to replace half the building, they know that they don't need to provide temporary work for half the building, and everyone's a winner. And conversely, if they know that they need to replace it all, that will drive a completely different solution, which you've alluded to.
But then the other side of it is, from their point of view, are they under significant pressure on a design program to get it designed in a certain amount of time, and they don't have time to actually investigate the building properly either?
How can you design? This is what I never understand. How do they design these permanent works when they haven't got a clue of what it's got to fit into and what's existing? I never understand it.
I've seen a tender for a building in Glasgow where the 8 to 10 stories and the foundation design was in abeyance because there was an existing store in there and they couldn't get in to do an SI. To get into the basement to drill all the slabs to get in and do borehole logs and that. But I just couldn't believe it when I saw it. But the client must be driving that. We'll get on with the design of the building and we'll deal with the foundations at a later date.
Interesting.
Okay, so on to the next question. I'll just flash that up on the screen. What is the panel's view of utilising BIM within demolition, specifically where there is no structural data whatsoever due to the property being derelict for so long and the property owner no longer trading?
I don't see any point whatsoever with BIM if you're demolishing a building, other than if you've got to share some particular drawings. Otherwise, it doesn't really make a great deal of sense to go to the level, go to spending enough money to make a BIM model to then demolish the building anyway. if you're keeping part of it, maybe, but if you're demolishing it, then I struggle to see why you would bother.
Yeah, I think it would only make sense in a cut and carve type scenario where you need to look at clash detection, the existing, the proposed, and the temporary works.
Okay, no problem. Just a quick one to the panel. Is there anything on the current list of outstanding questions you'd particularly like me to highlight and put up on the screen and talk about?
Could I just comment on the one about the MSc program? It's
of course.
Just an observation, really, but I don't know whether people can you put that one up or?
Yeah, I'm literally just firing that up now. Sorry, it just does take me a couple of seconds just to.
So basically, would you recommend the brand new MSc Temporary Works and Construction course or a standard MSc program? I would personally like to try and encourage more people to register an interest for the MSc at City University of London, because if you don't, that course will disappear very shortly. Not enough people from industry have expressed an interest in it, and there is a danger. They've said it to me, and they've said it to us as an organisation that degree, which is unique. There is no other like it for temporary works and construction method engineering. Do register an interest at least. Find out about it. I hear some good feedback of it. It's run part-time over 2 years, and part of it can be run from home. So yeah, please do it before it's too late.
I'd advocate that, because a lot of the things that we've been talking about and a lot of things that go wrong are to do with the interface between permanent works and temporary works. And my understanding of that course is that it gives a phenomenal amount of insight into those sorts of matters, and would bring somebody along in leaps and bounds as a consequence of what they learned on that course.
And much of the course is provided by industry. It's City obviously do some of the lectures themselves, but lots of industry experts, 20 or so industry experts, are delivering bits of the modules. So yeah, please do it before it's too late, because otherwise it'll be gone.
One of our engineers starting that this year, so interesting to see.
As we're on the kind of qualifications, I think it's a good chance to again go to David on the this question from Mark.
Let me just read that one.
So can David give an update on what is happening in the development and delivery of training for TW coordinators and supervisors beyond the heavy CITB courses? Is there something coming which is simpler or more proportional to builders' works, or more simple proprietary generic temporary work solutions for selection and implementation?
There's a number of things going on at CITB that I'm sort of attempting to follow, because it's not always very easy. The three Site Safety Plus SSP courses are up for review. There's also a push from the Temporary Works Forum to have a one-day refresher for the TWC, rather than have to go on the original 2-day course all over again. And we've put forward a suggested, what do they call it now, scheme of work for that. So I'm just waiting for them to pull together an industry project development group, I think they call it. There is also, CITB are also producing an overarching training standard, which will enable companies to have their own bespoke temporary works courses. Many do anyway, but also be able to reclaim grant. And in terms of the Temporary Works Forum, we had a directors meeting last week. We are likely to produce a sort of, we haven't quite spec'd it out yet, but a 3-hour e-learning module, for want of a better phrase, that is just entirely separate, perhaps at a more basic awareness for for clients and trying to bring in some of the things that are perhaps not mentioned on the SSP courses. So quite a lot sort of happening on the CITB side of things, but there are also they're working on some national occupational standards. There are a couple that I'm involved in, at least trying to understand all the NOS speak and just weave in a little bit of temporary works into some of the qualifications that exist already. So I don't know if that answers the question.
I think we've kicked a hornet's nest on this one. So I've shared another question from Mark on this one. So it says, whilst I agree, of course, for TW is an integral part is to be praised. MSc are normally aimed at designers. However, does the panel think a lower echelon qualification, HNC, is more aimed at site personnel would also be would be more advantageous to get TWs into the industry in greater numbers?
I think what Mark's, maybe what I'm reading what he's trying to say is there, that I think that we're talking about maybe temporary works awareness.
Yeah, should I see if Mark's available to bring in? 1 second.
Sure.
See if he's still, yeah, he's in it. Mark,
wrong Mark, isn't it?
Oh yeah, wrong Mark, sorry. Yeah.
It's Mark Nichols you want.
Yeah, I've gone for...
Yeah, I'm here, guys.
Hey, Mark.
Hey, Mark.
What I'm aiming at is, yeah, there's a lot of engineers that are able to look at structures, be they for demolition, be it for temporary supports for execution of construction. But what I find is, especially from the part of the industry I come from, is there's very little awareness, shall we say, when it gets out into the field. And what I'm talking about is like your site engineers, the man that stands behind the total station all day, who, as a ex-site engineer myself, you can get so much thrown at you. But I still don't know. And normally, I mean, I'm ex-military trained, so I'm a little bit different. But normally, a HNC doesn't really cover temporary works, but people can be thrown in at the deep end, if you like. Now, I'm not saying it should be done to replace formal TWC training, but certainly to give somebody an idea of what the TWC should be doing, and also give them, if you like, enhance their qualification so they understand the basics of integrating the temporary works into the permanent works.
Hi, Mark. I'm not sure I've got an answer for you, but I'll waffle for a bit. But it sounds an interesting proposition. Nobody's mentioned it to me before. I do think possibly we need to look as an industry collectively at everything through from education now through to initial professional reviews that take place now, to the profession, the qualification and CPD revalidation, and that applies to all of us, whether we're chartered members or incorporated engineers or technician engineers. So I'm not saying yes or no really, but it sounds as if possibly it's something that should be explored. Like the MSc though, the demand has to come from the industry. The demand appeared to be a greater demand for the MSc than has actually been realised.
That's exactly what's driving my question. So say you get 20 people do a BSc. Out of them 20, you might get 3 people want to go forward to do an MSc. It's a big personal undertaking to spend 5+ years in academia. Where you get a lower echelon HNC. So for every 20 people doing a BSc, you might get 100 people doing a HNC. But if you add 100 people with TW awareness to whatever extent the examining body deems fit for that qualification, you get more people at HNC than you do at MSc. So and them people are normally the people that will be on the site and can be the eyes, the ears, and the understanding, and raise it to the fewer people who want to take it right up to MSc and become the designers and be the specifics. That's what's driving my question.
One route that has been suggested, and it was to try and increase the content of temporary works in the CITB's SMSTS course and SSSTS course, which for many clients are and tier ones are mandated. And the feedback I get is that whilst there should be a little bit of knowledge imparted on those courses, it tends to come down to whoever the tutor is, and if that's not their experience, then you don't get very much. It's not a mandatory part of the course, I understand. So so if it's not mandated, most people are getting virtually nothing at what has become the norm, I suppose, for sort of site manager learning. So I think that's one area where if we could influence that, we could very quickly make a difference amongst hundreds of candidates, where the infrastructure to set up a new HNC, you've got to find the academic institution that wants to run it, and then there's the funding issues, and whereas perhaps trying to get something mandated into SMSTS, but again the demand needs to come from industry to lobby lobby CITB. Temporary Works Forum, whilst we might have 200 members, is only one voice. So if all in the stakeholder groups that CITB have, if you all tapped on their door and said, we need better temporary works awareness amongst site managers, please mandate something in SMSTS, then something might happen.
So we've developed some temporary works awareness training for assurance, which has been rolled out to our project managers and our construction managers and all sorts of people who are not normally get involved in temporary works, and it's been a big eye opener for them. And I would absolutely advocate all parts of the industry to improve their knowledge, skills and experience of the sorts of things we've been talking about today. And I pick up on the point that you've made about eyes and ears on the job. Now, if those eyes and ears on the job have got a bit more knowledge about some of the issues we've been talking about, they can speak to their supervisors, and that will promote all the right conversations to make things safer and more efficient. And so I think that there's a huge potential to upskill all of the I don't like using the word lower echelons, because these people are the people who are actually on the site exposed to danger. I believe that all colleagues within the industry have a good case for improving their skills, and it's up to the industry, the big hitters in the industry, to make that happen.
Steve, here's a question for you. Do you think there's a case that the Temporary Works Forum should commission a piece of work to look at the whole, well, what's the term used in Hackett? Golden thread, but the golden thread of temporary works. What are people being taught at A-level? What are people being taught on their degrees?
Yeah, where are the gaps?
Initial professional development right through to qualification.
Cracking idea.
And then try and just take stock of where we are now, and then establish what the gap is. I don't know quite who would do it or how much it would cost, but it seems perhaps that a starting point, we need to establish where we are. Just a thought.
Having the people having the ability to challenge things respectfully, in order to say, oh, I'm not quite sure what's going on here, might be the thing that starts the conversations that prevent accidents from happening. Yeah, and I'm a big advocate for what I've just heard.
I like to, for me, if we could have, we've got the chance, I think, if we have some evidence of going to start to bang a few drums to say we need to change. Whereas if we carry on having a coffee session every week, which is fantastic, debating things, I love it, but actually we're not going to make any difference, are we, unless we go and knock on a few doors where whoever those doors are in the great and the good, and rattle cages. And if we can provide evidence to say, look, there's an issue, here's a report, and we'd like you to do X, Y, and Z. That's just sort of suddenly what's starting to materialise in my mind about this discussion, because I've been in post with TWF now for over 6 years since I joined. We do lots of fabulous stuff, and we have quarterly meetings. Here we are. I'm criticising myself now. We have really good meetings when we can get together. There's some really good debate goes on, and but actually, maybe we just need to go and rattle a few cages outside of our confines as an organisation. Do the Construction Leadership Council have they any idea who the Temporary Works Forum is? Because government have suddenly discovered them. And do ICE, we're a specialist knowledge society, do ICE use us? I have actually got a meeting with them later on. So what about iStruct? What about Construction Industry Council? Do they know anything about us? So I'm knocking myself and thinking we need to up our game a bit, and if we want to change things.
Is there a merit to maybe looking at a temporary works awareness course provided by the TWF in the future?
Surely for rolling it out, the roadmap is how was safety legislation rolled out? Because the Health and Safety at Work Act predates temporary works by about 2 years from memory, but we all now go on site, put high-vis jacket and a helmet on. So there's the roadmap on how to roll it out. Just go back and just work out how was safety rolled out across every industry.
My point of view, surely the point to do it is at university, whether it's maybe not HNC level, but HND, BSc, BEng level. Is it not the place to speak with the joint board of moderators and try and get them to insist on something on temporary works being included in civil engineering degree courses? Is that not the place to tackle it?
Yes, and it's an interesting one. I've had a couple of academics, without naming names, who have recently gone through JBM visits and have remarked to me that there was nothing came in anywhere about temporary works in the visit. Now, there are requirements that can quite clearly be interpreted as equally applicable to temporary works, but if institutions are not being asked about what they're doing, well, they're not going to do it. It's perhaps the same as if HSE don't visit many sites, then people get lax. So yeah, I think, and I'm thinking that might be part of this review. I'm sort of forming in my mind this morning. Get somebody to do a review, and that's just part of it. Let's go and knock on the doors of the ICE and see what they're doing. Let's knock on the doors of the iStruct and see what they're doing.
From a personal perspective, and I know this is not just Andun, but I know Malachy, for instance, and I know other companies that spend some time in universities each year raising the awareness of temporary works, and I think that's a positive thing to do. We certainly do it, and I know others are doing it. So,
and certainly the Temporary Works Forum now has a scholarship and research fund. So this year we are supporting 3 universities through our members to undertake research. It's relatively small items. We're not talking about PhDs, and the output will be available to everybody. Obviously, if you're the sponsoring member, you'll see the emerging results, so you get a little bit of a head start. But and somewhere I have a list of I think there are about 20 or 30 members who do have occasional links with universities, and certainly fostering those. And if those members want to tap me up for the brief for the research scholarship and fund, and how you can apply for some money each year, then I'm sure that might help some discussions between companies and universities as well. So yeah.
Oh, brilliant. So we've actually achieved something already. So Malcolm's actually put a question in for you, David, that you can take offline, saying, that, the ICE welcome, are open to having some seminars about publicising the TWF. So it sounds like we've achieved something already in the group, putting the world to rights. So this could be the final kind of question because it's related, and this is from Ashley Best, and it kind of relates to a lot of what we've been speaking about around qualification. It's with professional qualifications, I think people are gaining professional qualifications too quickly. CNG, MIC in particular, with only 5 years served in the industry. Once CNG, in theory, you can sign AOPs, NWR Form 002, 003s. One good thing with NWR is that CVs are required for CRE approval. So I guess the crux of the question here is around timeframes to get these and industry qualifications. Does anyone want to comment?
I can start on this one. I mean, the language there is focused on rail. But I don't know if the question is a bigger question. So just specifically to the rail thing, I think there's a few things that aren't quite right with what's been said there. And just because you CNG, this goes back to what we talked about before, just because you CNG, it doesn't mean you're competent to do the sort of things that you need to do. I would like to take this offline with Ashley so that we can have a proper conversation about what I'm talking about there. But the bigger picture is, are people gaining professional qualifications too quickly? No, what they're doing is they're getting themselves chartered because they're demonstrating all the right attributes to be a chartered engineer. Okay, in this case, civils. Okay, that doesn't necessarily mean they've got diddly squat experience in dealing with temporary works matters. It all depends on their journey to getting to the point where they can demonstrate the attributes to be a chartered engineer. So the two aren't directly related, and it goes back to the conversation we had earlier. Anybody else?
It definitely ties in with the conversation from earlier. I kind of disagree with the too quickly element, because if you've provided evidence that you've got those 9 attributes, you've worked hard on that chartership process over those years, you've passed your interview, then you are deemed by the ICE to be a chartered engineer. Now, you may not have the competence in every single area of temporary works, permanent works, geotechnics or anything like that, but you should be competent in your own field of responsibility or something like that. I think the terminology is. So yeah, I wouldn't hold people back from wanting to become chartered. Everyone in my organization here is on the training scheme, and I'm pushing them hard to get there as quick as they can, but they are having to show that they have all the attributes to get there.
Yeah, I agree. It's 2 different things, isn't it? One is passing your professional qualification. One is competence to be responsible and sign off an AIP or Form 0203 submission. It's not necessarily the same thing. It's 2 completely different.
I think part of the Hackett review and so on post Grenfell is we get signed off, if I use that terminology, once in my case by I've done it with IOSH and ICE, but ICE they ticked me off in 1986. That's a long time ago. So revalidation is coming to the fore, and that might not necessarily mean just doing CPD. So yeah, am I still competent? I suppose I'll leave you to judge that, but I would say I'm competent, but I'm competent in a very much narrower field than I was ever before. I started off doing all sorts of things, bridges and roads and retaining walls and and rail, and now I've narrowed down. So I would say I'm still competent, but I know where I'm not competent, and I don't sell my services in those areas. So
that's in fact part of being a chartered or incorporated or Eng Tech, isn't it? It's recognising your own competence, when to stop and when to say I can't do that. It is one of the attributes, isn't it? Big part
I see all these qualifications as a really important, valuable stepping stone towards getting what you need to do your job. But you won't stop learning.
No.
Brilliant. So okay, so it's already been 80 minutes. That's we've really got stuck into a few issues there, and I love the fact that you know, we start these, I have a bank of sort of about 30 questions that could be asked, and I think we've covered one,
Yeah.
and the rest have come from the audience. So we're going to start wrapping up. So I want to take a moment to thank all of the panel. I'll give them a chance to kind of sign off in a second. But someone did mention the magical word there, CPD, and this has been something that I get asked a lot about from these sessions. Is you know, can I have a certificate for this? And we've had hundreds of attendees to these sessions, and we initially said no because I felt I was going to spend the rest of my life typing out certificates. But we've now got a system where you can apply to get a CPD certificate if you want for this session and any of the previous sessions that we've gone to. I will put that link in the chat as well. So I just wanted to thank again our panel, and just starting with Steve, just say, is there any final thoughts you wanted to share, or and we'll close out.
So my first thoughts are there's a whole bunch of questions that we haven't had time to answer, and it would be good if we could work out a mechanism of getting those answered, because there's some really good juicy questions in there. Second thing is I run something called Health and Safety by Design within Network Rail for buildings and civils, and there is some really good guidance which Andun have previously put out there. It'd be great to have a link to that guidance. This is guidance on constructability and temporary works. And a lot of the things that we've discussed are covered in examples in that document. It's 60 pages long, so it's a bit of a read, but it's very much worthwhile because it covers a lot of the issues: early contractor involvement, scheduling, making sure the designer has thought about temporary works in his permanent works design, etc., etc., etc. So there's a couple of hints and tips in that document that I think the audience would do well to have a look at. It applies to the wider industry, not just railway.
Yeah, I'm just grabbing that link now, and I'll drop that in the chat.
Thank you, sir.
Will I go next?
Over to you, David.
Yeah, I 2 or 3 things, I suppose. Why not join the Temporary Works Forum? Yeah, shameless plug. But I would love to see a little community within the Temporary Works Forum of permanent works designers who can start to develop guidance, discuss what the problems are that they see, but then also exchange them and share them with contractors, because I think until we start to have that dialogue, things are not going to improve as much as they might. So sharing and learning is important. If you have temporary works issues and you have a company bulletin, send me a copy. If I can put it on our website, even better. If you want me to keep it anonymous, I can, but it's useful to act as a sort of filter for some of the things that are going on in the industry. So yeah, if you're a permanent works designer, I'd love to have that conversation. And finally, our constructability guide. I'm hoping will be, it's with the publisher now, so by the time we proofread it and so on, I hope that will be available free, again, on TWF's website over the next, I'm going to say, within the next month. It should be earlier than that, but I won't be too optimistic. But yeah, do download that. And I suppose one of the basic messages of that is early contractor involvement and undertake periodic constructability reviews. So that would be some of my closing messages.
I'll jump in then. Thanks for everyone for attending the Q&A session. I think I'm probably just going to plug the TWF a little bit like David did. If Malcolm Peake is still on, we'd be keen to speak with you about closer collaboration with the ICE. And also we have our quarterly meetings where we typically do 4 or 5 presentations that are case studies or you know, failures or whatever someone wants to talk about in the topic of temporary works. And if anyone here is interested in presenting at our quarterly meetings in the future, please get in touch with myself or David. We would encourage people to come and talk to us, and we see where we can fit you in and how it ties in with our themes for that. quarter. So thanks.
Just adding to that, Malachy, whilst we are membership based, we do invite people as guests. So if you want to come along for a taster session to see what we get up to and what we do, then you just do touch base.
Virtual guests at the minute.
Yeah.
I want to add something that sounds a bit cheesy, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think what Andun have done over the past few months, putting together a whole package of really, really useful presentations, is something that the industry should applaud, because I certainly do.
Agreed. We need to get it on Netflix, though, don't we?
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Steve. The man we can all blame for that is Christian. It was his idea. It's not something I would have ever have thought was a good idea to do, but he convinced me that we should give it a bash, so we did. So, but it wouldn't be what it is without everybody who's been involved with it.
The industry learns from the industry contributing in this way.
Yeah,
and it's really good to see.
Okay, well, yeah, so I'd just like to say thank you to our guest panel once again for coming on, and we still managed to fill almost an hour and a half of waffle. So there's clearly more questions to be answered out there. And Christian, have you managed to record the questions this time before we close it down?
I can confirm I have been busy beavering away, copying and pasting, and making sure we've got them. I don't think you'd forgive me otherwise. I would just say that Malcolm is still on the call, David and Malachy, so he should have heard your message.
Excellent. So yeah, we'll get those questions and we'll share it amongst ourselves, and then we'll figure out how is best for us to try and answer what's left. I'm not sure how that'll be yet, but we'll try. And thank you all to, I don't know how many people are still listening. 60 odd people who are still listening to us waffle. So yeah, thank you once again for attending, and another month or so there'll be another presentation. Not sure what it'll be yet, but no doubt we'll figure something else out. Right, thank you all very much.
Cheers, Angus. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Fantastic. Thanks, everyone. I'm just going to keep the session open 1 second because we've had a last-minute question I want to capture. So I've got that. Thanks, everyone, and have a great afternoon.
Cheers.
Thanks. Bye-bye.